The year is 1777. The place, deep in the mist-heavy woods of upstate New York, where muskets rust in the damp and footsteps vanish into pine needles. A British army, 7,000 strong, is marching south from Canada, confident, well-drilled, and dressed in red. They carry the Brown Bess musket, the backbone of the empire, a weapon forged in conquest. They've never lost a major battle on American soil. But this land doesn't fight fair, and neither do the men who call it home. He doesn't wear a uniform, doesn't march in rows, doesn't shout. He stalks, waits, listens. His name is Timothy Murphy, 27 years old. From the Pennsylvania backcountry, 6 feet tall, lean and wiry, with hands like hammered iron and eyes sharp as a bird of prey. He wears buckskin and moccasins, moves like the forest itself, and in his hands, not a musket, but a rifle. To the British, it's a novelty, a poacher's toy, too slow to load, too fragile for war. But Murphy knows better. His rifle bears a strange spiral groove down the inside of its barrel, rifling. It spins the bullet, makes it fly straighter, farther, deadlier. And on October 7th, 1777, at Bemis Heights, Murphy climbs a tree, steadies his breath, and fires a single shot at a British general 300 yards away. That one round shifts the course of a war. This is the story of how a humble frontiersman and a twist of steel humbled the greatest army on earth and helped bring a nation to life. Act 1, the rifle. Despite the name, the Kentucky rifle was born in Pennsylvania, crafted between the 1750s and 1770s in the hands of German and Swiss immigrant gunsmiths. In places like Lancaster, Reading, and York, men like Martin Malin and Jacob Dickert blended old-world technique with frontier necessity. Their work wasn't for parades or rank and file. It was for men who hunted to eat and fought to survive. The process began with a flat iron bar, heated red-hot in a charcoal forge, then hammered around a mandrel into a barrel. The seam was welded shut with precision. The barrel was straightened by eye, no machines, just experience. Then came the magic. Rifling. A sharp tooth cutter was pulled through the barrel in slow, spiraling passes, carving grooves that spun the bullet in flight. It took all day to rifle a single barrel, but the result was unmatched accuracy. A musket might hit its mark at 50 yards. A rifle could drop a man at 200. Europe had known of rifling for centuries, but dismissed it. Too slow, too delicate, too complex for war. Muskets were faster to load, easier to use, and better suited for mass volley fire. But on the American frontier, the rules were different. One shot might be all you got, and it had to count. Miss a deer, you go hungry. Miss an enemy, you don't get another chance. Precision wasn't a luxury, it was survival. The Pennsylvania rifle reflected that truth. It was longer than a musket. Barrels ran up to 48 inches, but it was lighter and easier to carry in rough terrain. It could be used with deadly efficiency from brush, ridge, or treetop. And in the hands of a man like Murphy, it wasn't just a weapon. It was an equalizer. By the 1770s, this rifle had become the weapon of choice for scouts, hunters, and Indian fighters across the backcountry. It later earned the name Kentucky rifle, thanks to its use by frontiersmen like Daniel Boone, but its spirit was forged in Pennsylvania's iron and timber. A boy on the frontier was often given one as a rite of passage. He learned to load it, clean it, cast his own lead, and shoot with a patience no European soldier was ever taught. It was a part of him, tool, totem, and lifeline. The rifle changed everything. It empowered individuals, gave men control over their survival. It allowed them to protect, provide, and defend on their own terms. While the Brown Bess musket was built for massed ranks and thunderous volleys, the rifle was built for silence and certainty, for a shot taken alone, from the shadows, with nothing but the steadying of breath and the weight of decision. British officers sneered at it. They preferred noise over nuance, speed over precision. But they didn't live in the wilderness. They didn't track elk at dawn or fire at shadows in the brush. They didn't understand what that rifle meant. Timothy Murphy did. So did every man who'd ever held one with shaking hands and made it count. When Murphy took that shot in 1777, he wasn't just killing a general. He was proving a principle, that on this land the old rules didn't hold, that here a single man with the right skills, the right steel, and the will to wait could change the shape of a war. And he did, with one shot fired from a tree. The rifle wasn't just a tool, it was a legacy, a trusted companion, like a dog or a brother. It sat above the hearth, gleamed in the firelight, and passed from hand to hand as the seasons changed and the generations turned over. On the frontier, it was part of the family, and when men gathered for shooting matches, out in a clearing beneath a wide sky, it was more than sport. It was ceremony. It was reputation. A man's aim could make him a local legend. The best shots were household names admired for calm nerves and iron focus. These contests weren't games. They were tests of skill, of manhood, of survival. Because in the wilderness, accuracy was everything, and the rifle was the measure of a man. Timothy Murphy was one of those men. Born in 1751 in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, he came into a world balanced between wild and tame. His parents were Irish immigrants, poor in coin but rich in grit. Timothy grew up hard and fast, learned to hunt before he could read, trap before he could write. He moved through the forest like it knew his name. By the time he was 20, folks already whispered about his aim. They said he could shoot the eye out of a squirrel without disturbing the branch, that he could count wind by instinct and judge distance like a hawk in flight. He didn't boast, didn't need to. The calm in his eyes told you everything. He was a product of the frontier, independent, self-reliant, unwilling to bow to any crown or any man. He didn't need to say it. He lived it. When the drums of war began to roll in 1775, Timothy was 24. He and his brother joined the fight early. Not as line soldiers, but as riflemen. They signed on with Daniel Morgan, commander of a new kind of unit, Morgan's Riflemen. Not your typical military company. No neat rows, no bayonet drills. These were backwoods sharpshooters, hunters, trappers, and Indian fighters pulled from the rough corners of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. Daniel Morgan knew war. He'd fought in the French and Indian conflict and had scars to prove it. He didn't want polished soldiers. He wanted killers, men who could move like ghosts and shoot like gods. He picked 96 of the best marksmen he could find. Men who, in his words, could hit a man's head at 250 yards. These weren't empty boasts, they were warnings. Morgan's riflemen became the quiet terror of the battlefield, the original long-range specialists, the special forces of the Revolution. It was said they could shoot the button off a coat at 200 yards without tearing the cloth. And people believed it, because they saw it. Timothy Murphy came with his own rifle. Not a government-issue musket, but a finely crafted Pennsylvania rifle, hand-built by a gunsmith from the East, a 44-inch barrel, slim and dark, inlaid with brass and set in curly maple. It wasn't flashy, but it was deadly. Rifled with 7 deep grooves, each one carved with precision. The rifle fired a .50 caliber lead ball, smaller than the Brown Bess's .75, which meant Murphy could carry more ammunition into the field. He stored powder in a horn, balls in a leather pouch, ramrod tucked snug under the barrel. His kit was light, but his reach was long, and the rifle's real gift? Accuracy. At 300 yards, Murphy could put a ball through a man's skull. Clean, quiet, final. That kind of range made muskets seem like toys. A Brown Bess, fired from a smooth bore, lost its aim fast. At 100 yards, it might hit a man if the wind didn't fight you. At 200, you hope for luck. At 300, it was noise and prayer. That's the truth the British hadn't reckoned with. The Brown Bess musket, in service since 1722, was the backbone of the British Army. It was a smooth-bore flintlock, firing a massive .75 caliber ball. With no rifling in the barrel, the projectile rattled and spun unpredictably in the air. It was built for volley fire, line after line of men, shoulder to shoulder, unleashing coordinated thunder. Accuracy wasn't the point. Volume was. A trained soldier could fire 3 rounds a minute, and with hundreds doing so, the result was a storm of lead. That tactic worked well on the flat fields of Europe, but not in North America. Not in forests thick with trees and shadows. Not where your enemy didn't stand still. Here, the British lines became targets. Officers, easy to spot on horseback, found themselves hunted by men they couldn't see. British command scoffed at the rifle, thought it a novelty, a hunter's toy. They clung to the old ways. March in, fire, reload, repeat. They believed that discipline would always beat individual skill. They were wrong. Act 2. The Battle of Saratoga. Burgoyne's invasion. Summer 1777. By the summer of 1777, the British had drawn up an ambitious plan. General John Burgoyne would march south from Canada with a massive army. His goal? Split the colonies in 2. Isolate New England. Break the rebellion's back. He'd meet a second British force coming in from the west. Together, they'd seize the Hudson River and cut off the head of the Revolution. Burgoyne's army was no minor force. 7,000 men strong. British regulars, Hessian mercenaries. Native American scouts, artillery and supplies for a long campaign. They moved with confidence. Took Fort Ticonderoga easily, drove the ragtag American army south. By September, they were nearing Albany. But things weren't going as planned. The wilderness fought back. Under General Horatio Gates, the Americans had turned trees into weapons. They blocked roads with felled timber, tore down bridges, turned streams into swamps. Every mile cost the British time, sweat, and lives. Their supply trains stretched for miles, over 500 wagons crawling through rough terrain, vulnerable to ambush, their uniforms, made for parade grounds, soaked through with sweat and swarmed with insects. And as Burgoyne's army slowed, the American forces grew militiamen from across New York and New England flooded in, fired up by rumors of British cruelty and native allies raiding nearby farms. Then came the riflemen on September 12th. Morgan's unit reached the American camp at Bemis Heights after a 400-mile march from Pennsylvania. 21 days on foot, through forest and mountain. When they arrived, they weren't just welcomed, they were celebrated. Their legend had preceded them. The regulars stood straighter when they passed. These weren't men of parade. They wore buckskin shirts, leggings, moccasins. They carried tomahawks and long knives. And they could shoot. On September 19th, the armies clashed at Freeman's Farm, a small clearing just north of Bemis Heights. Morgan's men led the fight. Acting as skirmishers, they moved through the trees like whispers. They spotted a British foraging party, gave the turkey gobble call, and opened fire. It wasn't a line battle. It was a hunt. The riflemen didn't aim for masses. They picked officers, targeted leaders, and when they fired, men fell. The forest echoed with cracks and chaos, and the British finally understood. This was not a war they were ready for. The British came expecting a battle. What they got was something else entirely. Marching in neat columns, bayonets glinting under the high sun, their scarlet coats blazed like beacons against the shadowed greens of the American forest. Discipline held their ranks tight. Drums beat time. But behind trees, behind rocks, crouched men with long rifles, silent, patient, deadly. Then came the crack, a single shot, then another, and another. In seconds, British formations crumble. The riflemen opened fire with terrifying precision. No warning, no mercy. Officers fell first. Men in sashes and gorgets, standing tall and proud, became instant targets. Those gorgets, small crescent-shaped plates hung at the throat, glinted like bullseyes in the brush. The rifleman had a saying, "Don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes or the shine on their gorge." The results were devastating. British soldiers screamed, stumbled, died. Musket fire roared back, but it was wild. Blind shots into foliage. They were shooting at ghosts, at shadows that never stayed in one place. The men who killed them were already gone before the smoke cleared. Black powder left a trace, yes, but not enough. The riflemen were scattered, firing from cover, never clustered long enough for their positions to be spotted. Their buckskin clothing blended with the trees. Their movements were soundless. To the British, this was not a war. It was a waking nightmare. The rules they'd trained on back in Europe, the sacred formations, the power of volley fire, the certainty of discipline, meant nothing here. The individual ruled. Skill and instinct mattered more than command. And no one embodied that truth better than Timothy Murphy. He was in the thick of it, his rifle tucked to his cheek, his eyes searching, his breathing calm. He and his fellow riflemen targeted officers, men easy to spot, not just for their uniforms, but for how they carried themselves, proud, visible, vulnerable. That's who fell first. The loss of leadership shattered the British lines. Soldiers trained to follow, shouted orders, found themselves without direction, surrounded by a silent enemy that never showed itself until it was too late. Lieutenant William Digby, a British officer who survived, later wrote of the shock, "The enemy had with them a corps of riflemen, mostly Virginians, who were excellent marksmen. Dressed in white frocks in the woods, it was impossible to see them. They were constantly firing at our officers." Digby wasn't exaggerating. He was recounting trauma. The British, for all their bravery, had never encountered anything like this, and it shook them. The Battle of Freeman's Farm ended as a tactical draw, but it was a strategic blow to the British. They had been stopped. Nearly 600 British casualties, twice the number suffered by the Americans, and perhaps more damaging than numbers was the effect on morale. The myth of British invincibility, cracked, chipped, and shattered. The Americans were jubilant. They had stood their ground, held against the finest army in the world. The British, meanwhile, were left reeling, hemmed in by a forest that felt alive with death, trapped by men who didn't fight fair and didn't miss, cut off from supplies, with winter creeping in. General Burgoyne's once proud army was now battered, bloodied, and bleeding confidence. The psychological toll of this new warfare was immense. The riflemen weren't just soldiers, they were hunters, killers, invisible executioners. The British weren't prepared to fight men who fired from nowhere, then vanished, and worse, they were losing. Act 3, The Shot. 2 weeks passed. The armies stared each other down across narrow lines. Cold wind began to drift in. Supplies dwindled in the British camp. Their native allies had melted away, unwilling to fight for a cause that now reeked of failure. American numbers, meanwhile, kept growing, morale rising. Every sunrise brought more volunteers, more firewood, more resolve. Then came October 7th. Burgoyne, now desperate, launched another attack, the Second Battle of Saratoga. What would become known as the Battle of Beamy's Heights erupted on the same broken ground. But this time, the Americans were ready. They had spent the days fortifying their position. Earthworks, redoubts, trenches. They were no longer just defending. They were ready to strike back the British, led in part by General Simon Fraser, advanced with the same grit and courage they had shown before. Fraser was no coward. He was charismatic, sharp-minded, and utterly fearless. He rode up and down the lines on a gray horse, urging his troops forward, steadying men who wavered. His presence on the field gave the British their backbone. Wherever he rode, resolve followed, and the Americans noticed. Among them, in the heat of the fight, was General Benedict Arnold, technically relieved of command by Gates, but still burning with battle fever. He could no longer sit idle. Disobeying orders, he mounted his horse and charged into the fray. He rallied troops with the fury of a man who felt war in his blood. His voice thundered across the battlefield. His saber pointed toward enemy lines like a lightning rod. In the chaos, he led attack after attack, cutting through British defenses, driving them back, and in the final assault, a musket ball shattered his leg. But by then, the tide had turned. Arnold, reckless and brave, had cracked the British resolve, and in the trees above the chaos, another man prepared to end it. Daniel Morgan, commander of the riflemen, watched the field carefully. He saw Fraser, saw how his presence was turning the British line from collapse to courage, and he made a decision. "That gallant officer is General Fraser," Morgan said, pointing to the gray horse in the distance. "I admire and honor him, but it is necessary he should die." Then he turned to his best marksman. "Take your station in that tree and do your duty." Timothy Murphy nodded, said nothing. He climbed into a nearby oak, high above the battlefield, cradled by branches. He lay prone, calm as water, rested his rifle, studied the distance, 300 yards. Too far for a musket. Impossible for most men, but not for Murphy. He steadied his breath, checked the wind, let his heartbeat slow. And when General Simon Fraser passed into his sights once more, arm raised, saber gleaming, Murphy squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out. The gray horse reared, and Simon Fraser slumped in the saddle, then tumbled to the ground. The effect was instant. The British line, already wavering, lost its spirit. Without Fraser, the center could no longer hold. Chaos spread, orders dissolved, retreat followed, and in that one moment, in that one shot, Timothy Murphy, a quiet frontiersman from Pennsylvania, changed the course of the war. He'd made shots like this before. Not on battlefields, but in the dense, dripping forests of Pennsylvania, alone, bowing branches above, leaves slick underfoot, breathing fog into frozen air. A buck grazing in the distance, a gust of wind through the trees. He'd wait, watch, listen, and then exhale, squeeze. One clean shot. That was the rhythm he knew, the discipline he trusted. Timothy Murphy knew his rifle like a man knows the scar on his own hand. Every quirk, every creak in the stock. He knew how it kicked in his shoulder, how it whispered when loaded just right. He could feel when the powder was damp, when the wind cut too hard from the left, when the lead ball needed a patch shaved thinner. He wasn't just carrying a weapon. He was carrying memory, muscle, years of quiet repetition. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a craftsman, and his rifle was not just a tool. It was a brush. The forest was his canvas. The battle, his moment to paint. He fired. The first shot missed, just barely. It sang past Fraser's gray horse, drawing blood from the flank. The general stiffened in the saddle. Murphy reloaded without hesitation, hands moving on instinct. The second shot tore through the saddle leather beneath the general, still close. Closer. Fraser's aide saw it then, the danger, the invisible eye in the trees. He begged the general to take cover. But Fraser wouldn't yield. "My duty forbids me to fly from danger," he said, his voice unshaken. He didn't flinch. He believed in the code he'd been raised with, the discipline of standing firm, no matter the cost. Murphy reloaded again. Powder poured. Ball patched. Rammed home. Flint checked. Pan primed. He didn't rush. He breathed. Deep. Slow. Still. Then he raised the rifle one more time. His finger curled around the trigger. The .50 caliber lead ball tore through the autumn air, struck Fraser in the lower abdomen, passed through and lodged deep in his spine. The general groaned, slumped, and fell sideways from the saddle. British troops rushed to him, shouting. The battle raged around them. He was carried to the nearby home of Baroness Riedesel, where officers and nobles gathered in stunned silence. He lingered until the next morning. His last words, spoken softly to no one in particular, "Oh, fatal ambition." Fraser's death was not just the loss of a capable commander. It was a warning. The old ways were dying. The rules of war, once so clear, had shattered with a single shot fired from the treetops. Murphy hadn't charged a line or drawn a sword. He hadn't followed a drumbeat. He'd watched. He'd waited. And he'd changed the battle. That day broke the British lines. The Americans charged. Bayonets fixed. Rifles reloaded. The Redcoats began to fold. What began as a charge turned into a rout. 10 days later, on October the 17th, 1777, General John Burgoyne, his army bloodied, starving, cornered, surrendered to the Americans. Nearly 6,000 British troops laid down their arms. It was the first time in history that a full British army had surrendered in the field. The shock reverberated across oceans. The greatest military power in the world, humbled by farmers. But that moment did more than just bring victory. It opened the world's eyes. France, watching from afar, no longer hesitated. They joined the American cause, openly this time, with money, troops, and the Navy that would one day pin the British down at Yorktown, Spain, followed. Then the Dutch. The war became global. The revolution became real. And all of it, every shift of power, every alliance, every diplomatic cable sent across the sea, was set in motion by that single shot, a .50 caliber lead ball, a twisted barrel, a man in a tree. Act 4, the legacy of the rifle, a new kind of war. The Battle of Saratoga didn't just change the war, it changed warfare itself. Before, it had been all about formations. Muskets fired in tight volleys, flags raised high, cannons roaring from ordered lines. But that world was crumbling. The rifle proved it. At Saratoga, the long rifle showed its teeth. It outshot the Brown Bess, outmatched it in accuracy, in range, in silence. In the hands of a man like Murphy, it was more than a weapon. It was a revolution. It empowered individuals. It erased rank. One skilled rifleman could change the course of a battle from 300 yards away. That shook the very foundation of European military tradition. The British knew they'd miscalculated. They tried to respond. They raised the 60th Regiment of Foot, light infantry trained in woodland fighting. They hired German Jaegers, elite riflemen who'd trained in dense Bavarian forests. But by then, the Americans had a generation of riflemen already raised by hardship, taught by the land, and honed by necessity. The British couldn't catch up. Muskets fired in tight volleys. Flags raised high. cannons roaring from ordered lines. But that world was crumbling. The rifle proved it. At Saratoga, the long rifle showed its teeth. It outshot the brown Bess, outmatched it in accuracy, in range, and silence. In the hands of a man like Murphy, it was more than a weapon. It was a revolution. It empowered individuals. It erased rank. One skilled rifleman could change the course of a battle from 300 yards away. That shook the very foundation of European military tradition. The British knew they'd miscalculated. They tried to respond. They raised the 60th Regiment of Foot, light infantry trained in woodland fighting. They hired German Jaegers, elite riflemen who'd trained in dense Bavarian forests. But by then, the Americans had a generation of riflemen already raised by hardship, taught by the land, and honed by necessity. The British couldn't catch up, and they feared them. British commanders put a bounty on the riflemen's heads, 40 guineas for a scalp. Not because they were many, but because they were deadly. They moved like ghosts, killed at range, and didn't fight fair. That's what made them so dangerous. They didn't fight for kings. They didn't care for ceremony. They fought for home, for land, for the right to live without being ruled. This new kind of warfare, based on concealment, precision, and independence, fit the American spirit like a glove. It was a democratic way of fighting. Rank meant little. Nobility meant nothing. All that mattered was the shot. The riflemen, with their leather pouches and patched balls, their tomahawks and buckskin coats, became symbols of something larger. They were minute men with a longer reach. They were the first American heroes of the battlefield, and their legend would only grow. The rifle in American history. After Saratoga, the rifle kept marching west. It was the rifle of Daniel Boone, who blazed trails through Kentucky. His shot was legend. They said he could shoot the eye out of a squirrel without tearing the meat. He named his rifle Old Tick Liquor, and stories of its accuracy passed from campfire to cabin. It was the rifle of Lewis and Clark. On their expedition west from 1804 to 1806, they carried 15 rifles. They hunted buffalo and elk, used those rifles to defend themselves, feed their men, and remind every tribe they met this was a new nation, one that could shoot straight. It was the rifle of the mountain men, like Jim Bridger, Jedediah Smith, Kit Carson, men who lived alone in the Rockies, trapping beaver, trading with tribes, dodging grizzlies and war parties. Their rifles were their lifelines. Without them, they were meat. With them, they were legends. The rifle carved paths through the wilderness. It defended cabins. It hunted food. It settled scores. It shaped the identity of a people who saw themselves not as subjects, but as survivors. In time, the rifle became more than a weapon. It became myth. The long rifle came to represent something buried deep in the American soul: independence, self-reliance, and a man's right to stand on his own land and defend it. It became an icon, enshrined in the Second Amendment, in paintings, in songs, in stories passed down like scripture. The image endures. A frontiersman with a long rifle over his shoulder. No uniform, no orders, just grit, flint, and resolve. A symbol of freedom, a weapon of revolution, and a tool that tamed a continent, one shot at a time. From the last of the Mohicans to modern cinema, the image endures. A solitary figure in buckskin, a man with a rifle. He is not backed by armies. He doesn't march under banners. He walks into the wild alone, his fate hanging on his wits and the steel he carries. The American rifleman, shaped by hardship, tempered by wilderness, is the nation's original hero. He builds his life with calloused hands and defends it with quiet resolve. He stands for no one but what he believes, and he stands alone if he must. This rifleman is more than a character in a story. He's a reflection of something older, deeper, the American ideal of rugged individualism, self-reliant, free-spirited, unapologetically independent. He reminds us that strength doesn't come from numbers, but from courage, that nations aren't built by policy alone, but by the will of those who refuse to be broken. He is a myth, but also a memory, a figure rooted in truth. Act 5. The Science of the Spiral. The Kentucky rifle earned its legend not just through use, but through design. Its power lay hidden in the spiral cut inside its barrel. Rifling. This feature, now standard, was once revolutionary. Rifling gave a bullet spin. That spin created gyroscopic stability, like a spinning top or a spiraled football, keeping the projectile steady and true over long distances. It was a simple principle, but one that changed everything. A musket ball, lacking spin, flew like a rock in the wind, wobbling, unpredictable, destabilized by every puff of air. Its accuracy degraded quickly. Beyond 50 yards, it was more threat than precision. But the rifle, with its spinning shot, could strike targets at 200 yards or more with uncanny reliability. The difference wasn't in the powder or the lead, but in the spiral. The gunsmiths of Pennsylvania, mostly German and Swiss craftsmen, experimented tirelessly. They tried different twist rates, measuring how many inches the ball traveled down the barrel before completing a full rotation. After years of refinement, they found balance. One full turn in about 48 inches. It was slow, but ideal. Too fast a twist would tear the soft lead. Too slow and the spin lost power. But when done right, it turned each shot into a statement of mastery. It was precision born from trial, not theory, a perfect marriage of physics and frontier necessity. They had taken a concept known for centuries and turned it into something deadly, reliable, and wholly new. The Kentucky rifle wasn't just an improvement. It was a leap, an elegant, deadly leap forward. It wasn't just a weapon. It was art. Each rifle was handcrafted, many inlaid with brass and carved stocks. Beautiful, yes, but built for killing, built for freedom. The patch and ball. Part of the rifle's power came from how it was loaded. A musket ball was dropped loosely down the barrel, fast, convenient, but inaccurate. The ball rattled inside, bouncing as it fired. That windage stole velocity and spoiled aim. The rifle solved that with a patch. Riflemen wrapped their ball in greased cloth or leather, lard or tallow-soaked, to form a tight seal. That patch ball had to be rammed down hard. It took time, sometimes nearly a full minute, but it transformed performance. That snug fit did two things. First, it prevented gas leakage. When the powder ignited, all the force pushed the ball forward instead of escaping around it. That meant higher muzzle velocity, around 1,200 feet per second, and a flatter trajectory. The ball flew faster, dropped less, and reached farther. Second, the patch ensured the lead engaged the rifling grooves, taking on that all-important spin. With each shot, the patch also helped scrub powder residue, keeping the bore cleaner and more accurate. Yes, the rifle fired slower, but every shot mattered. You didn't fire to make noise, you fired to kill, and when a rifle spoke, it did not miss. A system of war. The Kentucky rifle was more than just a better firearm. It was an ecosystem, a system built around patience, knowledge, and discipline. Rifled barrel, patched ball, steady hands, keen judgment. It wasn't for the blind follower. It was for the thinker, the hunter, the man who fought with reason, not rage. This was a weapon built not just for battlefields, but for the very soul of the New World. In the woods of America, precision mattered more than pace. Strategy mattered more than tradition. And the rifle fit that truth perfectly. It empowered a new kind of soldier, one who didn't ask, "Where's the line?" but instead asked, "Where do I need to be?" It turned the individual into a threat no empire could calculate, a tool not for mass combat but for liberty. And in that way, the rifle wasn't just part of the revolution. It was a revolution. Modern relevance. The spiral lives on. Today, that same principle, rifling, the spiral, still defines modern firearms. From military assault rifles to hunting rifles to long-range sniper systems, the idea hasn't changed. Spin the bullet, and it flies true. The M16, the standard U.S. military rifle, uses a twist rate of 1 turn in 7 inches, optimized for high-velocity rounds. Modern sniper rifles like the Barrett M82 can land a shot at over a mile. That's a reach Timothy Murphy could never have imagined. And yet, the same science guides both. The same spiral. The same principle that helped a man in a tree change the outcome of a war. What the gunsmiths of Lancaster and York discovered through hammer and file became the foundation for every serious firearm on the planet. Rifling is no longer innovation, it's gospel. But beyond the barrel, beyond the ballistics, there's a deeper truth. The rifle was never just about range. It was about balance, about a man's relationship with his weapon, about the equalizing power of technology when placed in the right hands. The Kentucky rifle was a force multiplier. A farmer with a rifle could defeat a soldier with a musket. A frontiersman could defend his home against an empire. It didn't just give men the power to kill. It gave them the power to resist. That remains true. In every age, new tools rise to challenge old powers. Sometimes it's a spiral barrel. Sometimes it's a printing press, a camera phone, a line of code. But the principle is constant. With the right tool, the right mind can change the world. That's what Timothy Murphy did in 1777. 1 shot, 1 rifle, 1 twist of genius, and history bent with it. The American Revolution wasn't won in grand formations or polished drills. It wasn't fought by professionals in pressed uniforms, marching in unison beneath royal banners. No. This war was won in the forests and fields by men who held plows one day and rifles the next. It was fought and won by mechanics, by farmers, by hunters who knew the lay of the land better than any map could tell. These were men who aimed not for glory, but survival, who traded volume for precision, and who used the rifle not just as a weapon, but as an equalizer. The long rifle turned the tide. It made kings vulnerable. It gave a rebel, the right rebel, the power to strike like thunder out of nowhere. That's the truth of it. The revolution was not just a war of men. It was a war of ideas and tools, and that story still echoes. Because even now, in our world of satellites and smartphones, the same truth applies. Technology, in the right hands, still topples giants. We saw it in the Arab Spring, where social media became a megaphone no dictator could silence. We see it every day in citizen journalism, where one smartphone camera can hold power to account. It's the same story, told with new tools. The few, armed with knowledge and courage, reshaping the world. That's what the Kentucky rifle was. A disruption, a force multiplier in wood and iron. Proof that the next revolution might not come from armies, but from innovation and from the will to use it. But there's one more piece to the story, maybe the most important part. Timothy Murphy didn't carry a standard-issue weapon. His rifle wasn't just a tool. It was an extension of his soul. He knew its grain, its balance, the way it pulled in the cold morning air. He knew how it breathed in battle. That kind of intimacy between man and machine is rare and powerful. In today's world of digital distance and mechanized war, where soldiers press buttons from miles away. We forget what it means to trust a weapon the way Murphy did, to carry it like a limb, to believe in it like a partner. But it's a connection we do well to remember, because at its core, the story of the Kentucky rifle isn't just about technology. It's about people. It's about the quiet strength of the individual. It's about how history is not made solely by kings or generals, but by ordinary men and women who, when faced with impossible odds, rise to the moment and shape the world. Timothy. Murphy was one of those men, just a frontiersman with a rifle and the nerve to use it. And because of that, the world was never the same.